The Cooper's Ferry site is a very special site in the Pacific Northwest. So far, evidence that we've obtained through excavations suggests that people may have been visiting this part of the Salmon River Canyon as early as 13,000 calendar years ago. This site is unique because it shows a long record of human occupation, beginning with peoples bearing stemmed projectile points. Stemmed projectile points may represent the earliest peoples in the Pacific Northwest, or at least one of the earliest peoples. So I'm holding a replica of a stemmed point that we recovered from the Cooper's Ferry site in 1997. And this replica that I'm holding here is made from laser scanning of the original piece, and then we sent that data file of the laser scan to a machine shop and they milled it out of plastic. But even though this is a replica, I can still show you some of the important technological aspects of stemmed points. So as the name suggests, stemmed points have an unusual bottom or haft element called a stem. And you can see here, there's a part where the blade comes down and then it goes in slightly, and this portion below the blade is what we call a stem. It has a slight indentation at the base of the stemmed haft element where it transitions to the blade, and we call these shoulders. Sometimes people of the past would tie these to a handle or a shaft, and then they would resharpen the blade. And as they resharpen the blade, a part of the blade would begin to go inward as you're removing pieces of the rock off, and it leaves behind a little bit of a bump at the transition from the haft to the blade element, and we call this an ear. So we have the blade, we have the ear, the shoulder, and then the stemmed haft. These kinds of projectile points were made in a way that's very distinctly different from other kinds of early projectile points in Western North America. What we're seeing from Cooper's Ferry is that stem points were made by simply detaching off a long flake that's not that much bigger than the piece you see here, and then they would go and simply apply an antler tip and press off small flakes. They would turn it over, press off more flakes to create the shape that we see with the projectile point as it appears right now. And what's also important about this replica and demonstrates another aspect of how these projectile points were made is that it still retains what we call the original platform. And this original platform is still retained on the base of this projectile point. That's a very unusual technological feature. That tells us a lot about how the point was made. Another projectile point tradition that we see in the Pacific Northwest is called the Fluted Point tradition. Archaeologists have debated about whether or not stemmed projectile points and fluted projectile points share some kind of evolutionary line. The argument sometimes goes along the lines of fluted points precede stemmed points, although this has never been shown in any archaeological sites from the Pacific Northwest or elsewhere.
Well, what we're looking at is a projectile point, and I believe this is a stemmed point.
These stem points are common in the far west from a time period associated with the late Pleistocene to early Holocene. So that's before 9,000 years ago. And they're characterized by these long blade portions with contracting bases that have these pronounced shoulders. So it was most likely used within an atlatl dart system. So this portion was hafted to that element and then extended up along the blade. You can see where it's been resharpened and reworked a few times from all these little pressure flakes that have been taken along the margins of the blade portion. So these style points are what is characterized as part of the Western stemmed tradition. And we see these at the earliest deposits at the Cooper's Ferry site, as well as the earliest deposits at the Paisley Cave site in southeastern Oregon.
The Cooper's Ferry site may add important information to help resolve this debate. It contains evidence that stem points may be as early or earlier than Clovis points elsewhere in the New World. If this information is true, that stem points are as early or earlier than Clovis elsewhere in the New World, This changes our understanding of how the New World was peopled.